Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, the vast and sometimes, let's be honest, bewildering world of wellness practices. You know, the ones some are super common, widely embraced, while others, well, they're often met with a bit of skepticism, which isn't always a bad thing. Today we're taking a really insightful deep dive into a practice you've probably heard of, maybe even experienced yourself: reflexology. We've gathered a pretty fascinating stack of sources to really unpack what it is, where it comes from, and crucially, what the actual science says about it.
Indeed. And what's quite intriguing here, I think, is how reflexology is often called zone therapy, historically works on this basic idea. It involves applying pressure to very specific points on the body, mostly the feet, but also the ears and the hands sometimes. Our mission today really is to explore the claims behind it, which can be quite bold, and then, importantly, connect those back to the broader scientific understanding.
Exactly. So whether you're just curious, maybe you've wondered if it could be right for you, or perhaps you've even tried it and want a bit more context, we're here to give you those key nuggets of knowledge. We want to make sure you really understand reflexology without getting, totally bogged down or overwhelmed.
Okay, so let's unpack this right from the start. For a lot of people, I think, the word reflexology just brings up images of a really nice, relaxing foot massage. But looking at our sources, it's clear it's presented as something much more specific, with a whole theory behind it.
Right, precisely, yes. While it definitely involves touch and can feel relaxing, our sources define reflexology clearly as an alternative medical practice. It's about applying pressure to those specific points: feet, ears, hands, using particular thumb, finger, and hand techniques. And one key difference often pointed out is that it's done without using oil or lotion, unlike, say, a Swedish massage.
Right. And it's not just applying pressure anywhere, is it? It's based on this very specific idea, this concept of zones and reflex areas. Could you expand on that a bit? Yes, absolutely. And this is where its nature as what's termed a pseudoscientific system really comes into view. The core idea, the premise, is that these specific zones and reflex areas on the feet and hands supposedly reflect an image of the entire body, like a map. So the belief among practitioners is that by manipulating these points, they can actually cause a physical change or a therapeutic effect in the part of the body that supposedly corresponds to that point. Just to give a little context on how different groups see it, the Cochrane collaboration defines it pretty simply. They say it's gentle manipulation or pressing on certain parts of the foot to produce an effect elsewhere in the body. The Australian Government's Department of Health gives a slightly broader picture. They call it a system of applying pressure, usually to the feet, which practitioners believe stimulates energy and releases blockages in specific areas that cause pain or illness. So you see, even the definitions hint at this underlying theory and the intended outcomes.
Okay, so right from these initial definitions, it seems like our source material makes a pretty clear statement about where it stands scientifically. It kind of cuts right to the chase, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. The opening of our main source is, well, quite direct. It states, unequivocally, there is no convincing scientific evidence that reflexology is effective for any medical condition. So that sets a very clear tone right from the beginning as we dive into the evidence, or lack thereof.
Every practice seems to have a backstory, and reflexology is definitely no different. It didn't just, appear out of nowhere. It has quite a journey. Where do its roots lie? How did it develop into the system we sort of recognize today?
That's a great question, and understanding the history is, I think, quite helpful. While you have similar practices, like acupuncture in China, that go back thousands of years, modern reflexology, or zone therapy, as it was first called, really gained traction in the West, specifically in the United States, around 1913. It was introduced by Dr. William H. Fitzgerald, an ear, nose, and throat specialist working with Edwin F. Bowers. Fitzgerald's initial idea was quite specific. He claimed that applying pressure to certain points could actually produce an anesthetic effect, pain relief, in other distant parts of the body.
An anesthetic effect just from pressure. That sounds like a pretty bold claim for that time. But it sounds like one person in particular really took these early ideas and, well, fleshed them out, shaping it into the practice we mostly see today. Who was that?
Ah, yes. Here's where it gets really interesting. That key figure was Eunice D. Ingham. She was a nurse and a physiotherapist. In the 1930s and 40s, she significantly modified and expanded on Fitzgerald's zone therapy. She really ran with it. Ingham claimed that the feet and hands were especially sensitive zones, and she meticulously mapped the entire body onto the feet as reflexes. Imagine creating detailed charts showing exactly which spot on the foot corresponds to which organ or body part. It was a huge undertaking. And it was Ingham who actually renamed zone therapy to reflexology, the term we use now. Many reflexologists today still use her methods, or very similar ones like those developed later by Lauren Norman.
So it started as this idea about pressure causing numbness, basically, and then evolved pretty quickly, just within a few decades, into this really complex system with detailed body maps on the feet. That's quite a shift in theory. Okay, so we know what it is, we know where it came from. But the big question is, how do practitioners actually claim it works? What's the theory behind pressing these specific points? What are they supposed to be doing?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And interestingly, our sources point out there isn't actually one single agreed-upon explanation among reflexologists themselves for how it works physiologically, which is, quite telling in itself. But a very common theme, a unifying idea, is the concept of qi, sometimes spelled QI. It's this idea of an invisible life force or energy field, borrowed often from traditional Chinese medicine. Reflexologists often divide the body, conceptually, into 10 vertical zones, 5 on each side. They believe spots on the foot correspond to areas within these zones. And the core idea is that manipulating these foot points can unblock or rebalance this key energy, and that's what improves health. They suggest blockages in this energy prevent healing. Now, besides the key concept, there are other ideas sometimes mentioned. One is simply that pressure on the feet helps relieve stress and pain elsewhere in the body. How? Well, some suggest it might send signals that balance the nervous system, or perhaps trigger the release of chemicals like endorphins, the body's natural painkillers.
So there's a mix of energy-based and more sort of pseudo-physiological explanations offered.
Okay, those are definitely intriguing claims. A complex system involving energy flow, nerve signals, endorphins. But these are the claims. What does the established medical and scientific community say about these proposed mechanisms? Do they hold up?
Well, this is where the claims meet scientific scrutiny, and the medical community largely rejects these hypotheses. They point to a fundamental lack of scientific evidence supporting any of these proposed mechanisms. It's not just disagreement. It's that these ideas don't align with our established understanding of physiology and anatomy. The medical consensus relies on well-tested models, like the germ theory of disease, and our vast knowledge from fields like neurology and endocrinology, specifically that central claim about manipulating energy, or qi. It's completely unsupported by science. There's just no scientific evidence that things like life energy, energy balance, crystalline structures under the skin, or these special pathways actually exist in the way described. We can't detect or measure them scientifically. They don't fit into our biological models. Simon Singh, in his book Trick or Treatment, makes a great point. He argues if the feet truly reflect organs, reflexology needs an evolutionary explanation from Darwinian natural selection for how that happened. And, well, no such argument or evidence has ever been presented. It lacks a plausible, testable biological mechanism.
Right. Which leads us straight to the crucial question for anyone thinking about reflexology, especially for a health issue. We've heard the claims, the theories, and the scientific skepticism about how it might work. But does it actually work? What do the studies, the reviews, the evaluations say about its effectiveness?
This is where the picture becomes, frankly, very clear and very consistent across the board. Multiple major reviews, systematic ones from 2009, 2011, and various government evaluations have all reached the same conclusion. There is no clear, convincing scientific evidence that reflexology is effective for treating any medical condition. For instance, back in 2015, the Australian government's Department of Health did a huge review of alternative therapies, including reflexology. Their finding: no clear evidence of effectiveness, period. And this had real-world consequences. In 2017, the Australian government announced reflexology would no longer qualify for insurance subsidies. Their reasoning was explicit: to ensure taxpayer money goes to therapies with actual evidence, not those lacking it. It's about responsible use of public funds.
Wow, that's a very strong position from a government health department. And this isn't just one country's opinion, right? Our sources mention broader academic reviews finding the same thing.
That's absolutely correct. The scientific consensus is pretty solid on this. That 2009 systematic review of randomized controlled trials used very direct language. It concluded, the best evidence available to date does not demonstrate convincingly that reflexology is an effective treatment for any medical condition. And this is really important when we talk about serious illnesses. Cancer Research UK, for example, has stated very clearly that there is no scientific evidence to prove that reflexology can cure or prevent any type of disease, including cancer. They emphasize there's no clinical evidence that helps treat cancer either, and this leads to a serious concern raised by many medical professionals. Using unproven therapies like reflexology for potentially serious conditions could tragically delay people from getting proper, evidence-based medical care that could actually help them.
So, for you, listening right now, this really highlights a crucial difference. A reflexology session might feel nice, it might be relaxing, and relaxation itself has value, of course, but it's vital to separate that feeling, that experience, from the idea of it being a medically effective treatment, especially if you're dealing with a real health concern. The evidence just isn't there to support those medical claims. Okay, given this stark lack of evidence for effectiveness, it does make you wonder, how does reflexology fit into the wider health landscape? Like, how is it regulated? And despite everything we've just discussed, how popular is it actually? Is it widely used?
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? Regulation varies. In the UK, for example, there's a body called the Complementary and Natural Healthcare Council, the CNHC. They sort of coordinate reflexology on a voluntary basis. People who register with them are supposed to meet certain standards. But, and this is a big but, registration is voluntary. So technically, anyone can call themselves a reflexologist, whether they're registered or meet those standards or not. And our sources mention a revealing incident where a skeptic found quite a few, I think it was 14, CNHC-registered reflexologists making claims about effectiveness that just weren't supported by evidence, and actually conflicted with the UK's advertising rules. The CNHC had to step in and get those claims retracted. It really shows the difficulty in regulating claims when the practice itself isn't evidence-based.
Yeah, that really highlights the challenge of self-regulation and making sure people aren't misled. But even with the scientific findings and these regulatory issues, it seems like reflexology is still surprisingly popular in some places.
Well, absolutely. And this, for me, is one of those intriguing parts, this huge gap between scientific evidence and public uptake. Reflexology is actually one of the most used alternative therapies in Denmark, for instance. A national survey there back in 2005 found that over 21%, more than a fifth, of the Danish population had tried reflexology at some point, and over 6% had used it just in the previous year. Similarly, a study in Norway from 2007 showed about 5.6% of their population had used it in the last 12 months. These numbers are significant. They likely speak to many factors, maybe the desire for hands-on care, the appeal of natural approaches, the comfort of touch, or perhaps the very real power of the placebo effect. Feeling better isn't the same as being medically treated, but feeling better still feels good.
So wrapping this section up, we have a practice with a clear history, a specific theory, even if it's scientifically unsupported and undeniable public interest in some regions, but it consistently lacks scientific backing for its medical claims. So, based on our source material, how is it ultimately classified?
Our sources place it quite clearly under several distinct categories. It's listed under alternative medicine, certainly. It's also classified as pseudoscience due to the lack of evidence and reliance on untestable concepts like qi. It falls under naturopathy and manual therapy in terms of its practice style. And significantly, it's also listed among unproven and disproven cancer treatments, highlighting the dangers of using it for serious conditions.
So we've journeyed through the origins, from zone therapy to modern reflexology maps. We've explored those intriguing claims about qi and reflexes, and we've looked hard at the scientific evidence. From Fitzgerald and Ingham's historical roles to the proposed but unproven mechanisms, a very clear picture has definitely emerged throughout this deep dive. And that picture, based on the scientific consensus, is that there's just no convincing evidence that reflexology works as a medical treatment for any condition.
Yes, and if we step back and look at the bigger picture, this whole exploration really underscores how important it is to be discerning. We need to distinguish between practices that might offer comfort, maybe relaxation, maybe even some temporary symptom relief via placebo, and those practices that make specific claims about treating medical conditions, especially when those claims just aren't backed by solid science. The fact that it's so popular in some places, despite the overwhelming lack of evidence, raises really important questions, doesn't it? About how we as individuals evaluate health information and decide what to trust.
Absolutely. So as you, our listener, reflect on everything we discussed today, maybe consider this. Given this popularity, this enduring appeal of practices like reflexology, even when the scientific evidence for efficacy is missing, what factors do you think contribute most to that? Personal experience, cultural beliefs, dissatisfaction with conventional medicine, and perhaps more importantly, armed with the kind of critical look we've taken today, how might you approach evaluating other health claims you inevitably encounter in the future? How will you separate the evidence from, well, everything else?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a subject many think they know: the Crusades. Usually it's boiled down to knights, faith, maybe some epic battles.
I have the classic image.
But like so much history, the reality is, well, way more complicated.
Yeah.
And surprising, actually.
Absolutely.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into the sources. We want to explore everything from why they started, what actually happened, and, crucially, their lasting impact.
It's a huge topic. We're talking about centuries of conflict, yes, these religious wars, but also this broader idea, this crusading movement.
A movement, so more than just battles for Jerusalem.
Oh, definitely. The motivations were incredibly diverse. It spread geographically far beyond the Holy Land. And the sources, well, they help us piece together not just the what, but the why. And those ripple effects, we're still feeling them.
Okay, let's start there then. Let's unpack this term. What exactly were the Crusades? Because as you hinted, the word itself has a history.
It really does. So initially, you're right, it points to those specific military campaigns. Western Christians, 11th to 13th centuries mainly, trying to reclaim the Holy Land, Palestine, Jerusalem from Muslim control.
And the Pope was central to this.
Crucial. Initiated by the papacy, often with big promises of spiritual rewards. But pinning it only to that definition can be a bit misleading.
How so?
Well, historians like Thomas Asbridge point out that using just the conventional term imposes, his words were, a somewhat misleading aura of coherence and conformity on the early efforts, which were actually quite varied.
Right, so it wasn't just one monolithic thing from the start.
Not at all. And the scope widened. Scholars now talk about the crusading movement to include other conflicts in other regions that were authorized by the Pope under that same kind of banner.
Oh, okay.
And the language reflects this. Early on, participants didn't say, I'm going on a crusade. They talked about a journey or an expedition. Yeah, and by around 1250, you see canon lawyers making distinctions. They had crux transmarina, the crossover seas for the Holy Land, and cruxis marina, the cross this side of the sea, for fighting within Europe.
So the cross could be taken for different reasons, different locations.
Exactly. The people involved were the crucignati, those signed with the cross, the actual word crusade as we use it. That really only got established much later, around 1706.
Wow, that late.
Yep. Oh, and a quick side note, those crusader states they set up in Syria and Palestine, they were often called Outremer,
Which is French for?
the land beyond the sea, gives you a sense of how geographically distinct it felt.
So the terminology itself shows this wasn't static. Which brings us to the big question.
Yeah.
Why did this massive series of conflicts even start? It clearly wasn't just a sudden impulse.
No, definitely not. It was a confluence of factors building up for a long time. You have to look at religion, politics, even economics.
Let's break that down. Religion first.
Sure. So places connected to Jesus, especially the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, were huge pilgrimage sites. Very popular.
People had been going for centuries.
Right. But reports of attacks on pilgrims were becoming more frequent. And Christians living under Muslim rule, the dhimmi, while technically protected, were in a subordinate position.
Which probably created some unease back in Western Europe.
You could say that. Then there's the geopolitical side. Remember the Roman Empire split? Well, the eastern part, Byzantium, survived.
But it had lost a lot of territory over the centuries.
A huge amount, especially to the Islamic Caliphate starting in the 7th century. Jerusalem itself fell way back in 638.
And was the Islamic world unified at this point, just before the First Crusade?
That's a key point. No, not really. While Islamic expansion was initially driven by the concept of jihad, that unity fractured pretty early on. By the mid-10th century, you had rival powers.
Like B?
Well, the Umayyads in Spain,
Oh.
Al-Andalus, the Shiite Fatimids based in Egypt, and the Abbasids, technically the main caliphate in the Middle East. But even their power was complex.
And then newcomers arrived.
Exactly. Nomadic Turkomans, especially the Seljuks, started migrating into the Middle East from the 1040s. They took effective control of the Abbasid Caliphate by 1055.
And they clashed with Byzantium.
Massively. The Battle of Manzikert in 1071. The Seljuks crushed the Byzantines, basically opening up Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, to Turkoman settlement. It was a disaster for Byzantium.
Okay, so Byzantium is weakened. The Islamic world is fragmented.
Right. And even the Seljuk Empire itself started breaking down into civil war by 1092. Plus, the Fatimids in Egypt faced their own succession problems, leading to splinter groups like the Nizaris, the famous assassins. So it's a really messy, fractured picture.
Meanwhile, what's happening back in Western Europe?
Things are actually looking up in some ways. Around 950 to 1070, there was a medieval warm period. Better climate meant better harvests, population growth, economic expansion,
Trade picking up.
especially Mediterranean trade, with Italian merchants becoming major players. But politically, central authority was often quite weak.
So local lords gain power.
Exactly. Local lords and their heavily armored knights became dominant figures. This led to lots of internal squabbles, territorial disputes, frequent local warfare.
And the church, where does it fit in?
The church was going through its own major transformation. Mid-11th century, you have this liberty of the church movement. Popes started asserting supremacy over all Christians.
Which didn't go down well in the East.
Not at all. Eastern Christian leaders rejected papal supremacy, leading to the formal East-West Schism in 1054. You also had the investiture controversy, a huge power struggle between popes and kings over who appointed bishops.
So the papacy is asserting itself.
Big time. And theologians were reviving ideas about just war, based on Augustine from the 5th century. They were starting to argue that dying in a just war, once sanctioned by the church, could be seen as martyrdom.
A powerful incentive.
Immensely powerful. In fact, Pope Gregory VII had actually planned a campaign to help Byzantium against the Turkomans back in 1074. It never happened, but the idea was already there.
It really is incredible.
Yeah.
Climate change, trade routes, religious splits, local nightly violence, papal ambitions, all these different threads weaving together.
A real powder keg situation, you could say. A mix of opportunity, anxiety, and perceived threats.
Okay, so stage is set. Then comes 1095. Byzantine Emperor Alexios I sends an appeal for help to Pope Urban II. Now, this is where it kicks off. How did Urban manage to harness all that energy and launch the First Crusade?
Well, Urban's speech at the Council of Clermont in November 1095 was frankly a work of genius. He didn't just ask for soldiers to help Byzantium.
He framed it differently.
He framed it as an armed pilgrimage to liberate Jerusalem. He tapped into that deep religious piety, but also addressed the night's violence. He basically said, stop fighting each other, fight for God instead.
And offered rewards.
Huge ones. Spiritual rewards, forgiveness of sins, lifting of penance. He promised full remission. And the reaction was apparently electric. The crowd supposedly cried out, Deus vult,
God wills it.
the famous cry. And the ritual started right there, taking the cross. Literally sewing a cloth cross onto your clothes. Bishop Adhemar of Lupui was the first.
But Urban intended this for knights, for warriors, right? Did it stay contained?
Not even close.
Yeah.
His call unleashed this wave of popular enthusiasm. It led to what's called the People's Crusade in 1096.
Led by.
Charismatic figures like Peter the Hermit, thousands of ordinary people, peasants, townspeople, some poorer knights just took off.
Without proper organization.
Pretty much. They caused trouble, plundered towns in Hungary, clashed with Byzantine forces, and tragically, there was a darker side, too.
The attacks on Jewish communities.
Yes. One group, led by Count Emicho, carried out terrible massacres against Jewish communities in the Rhineland, starting in places like Speyer. A horrific part of the story.
And what happened to Peter the Hermit's group?
They eventually got shipped over to Anatolia by the Byzantines, probably just to get rid of them, and were basically wiped out by the Seljuk Turks at the Battle of Sibatot in October 1096.
A grim foreshadowing, perhaps. But the main force, the one Urban had intended, was still coming.
Yes, the Prince's Crusade. They set off later in 1096. Interestingly, no kings went initially. Most were tied up in disputes with the papacy, like that investiture controversy we mentioned.
So who are the leaders?
Major nobles, people like Godfrey of Bouillon, Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman from southern Italy, and Raymond of Saint-Gilles, who was probably the wealthiest. Robert Curthose, William the Conqueror's son, was there too.
What a lineup.
It was, and the makeup of their armies was diverse, described as a curious mix of rich and poor, saints and sinners. Think about the cost, though.
You mentioned it was expensive.
Incredibly, for a knight, participating might cost the equivalent of 4 years' income. Imagine putting your entire life on hold, mortgaging everything for this incredibly dangerous, uncertain journey.
The level of commitment is hard to grasp. Did they face challenges straight away?
Oh, yeah. Tension with the Byzantines was immediate. Emperor Alexios wanted them to swear oaths to return any former Byzantine lands they captured.
Did they agree?
Mostly, though reluctantly. Despite the friction, they scored some major early victories against the Seljuks. They took Nicaea back for the Byzantines in June 1097 and won a crucial battle at Dorylaeum.
And the first Crusader state was formed around then.
Correct. Baldwin of Boulogne, Godfrey's brother, peeled off and captured Edessa in March 1098. That became the county of Edessa.
What about Antioch? That was a major city.
Antioch was a brutal siege, lasted for months. It finally fell partly through a deal Bohemond made with someone inside. But what followed was grim, a massacre of the Muslim population, and even some local Christians got caught up in it.
And they face a counterattack.
A huge relief army under Kerboga arrived, but the Crusaders, despite being weakened, managed a decisive victory outside the city walls in June 1098. That was critical.
And then finally Jerusalem.
The march south in 1099 was tough, heat, disease. But they reached the city in June. They needed siege equipment, and luckily some Genoese ships arrived with craftsmen.
And they breached the walls.
On July 15th, 1099, what followed was infamous. A terrible slaughter and widespread looting. Godfrey of Bouillon was elected the first ruler, though he famously refused the title king in the city where Christ wore a crown of thorns.
So victory, but at a terrible cost.
Absolutely. They solidified their position by defeating an Egyptian Fatimid army at Ascalon a month later. After that, with their vows fulfilled, most of the surviving Crusaders headed home.
It's just the sheer scale, the mix of intense faith, brutality, political maneuvering. It really did establish that Western presence in the region, didn't it?
It did. The creation of those four Crusader states, Edessa, Antioch, Jerusalem, and later Tripoli, as one historian put it, committed Western Europeans to crusading for the foreseeable future. But that future wasn't going to be easy.
Right. So they'd achieved the initial goal, but holding on to it was another matter. How did things evolve after 1099? Did this crusading movement change direction?
Well, the idea that Crusaders were somehow invincible, that got shattered pretty quickly. There was another wave in 1101, sometimes called the Crusade of the Faint-Hearted, meant to bolster the new states.
How did that go?
Badly. It was plagued by divisions and got crushed by combined Muslim forces. Showed how vulnerable they still were. But this period also saw something really important emerge.
Which was?
The military orders. The Knights Templar, initially housed near Solomon's Temple, hence the name, and the Knights Hospitaller. They started as groups helping pilgrims, but evolved into these powerful, dedicated military institutions. Knights who are also monks, essentially.
Combining piety and warfare. Okay, so what triggered the next big expedition, the Second Crusade?
That was sparked by the fall of Edessa, the first Crusader state, back into Muslim hands in 1144. Zengi, a powerful Turkish ruler, captured it.
A major setback.
Huge. Pope Eugenius III responded by issuing a papal bull, Quantum Predecessors, in 1145. This is significant because it really formalized the granting of indulgences, the spiritual rewards for crusading.
And who promoted this one?
The star preacher was Bernard of Clairvaux, a hugely influential Cistercian abbot. He was incredibly successful in recruiting major rulers like the King of France and the Holy Roman Emperor.
But his preaching had unintended consequences, too.
Sadly, yes. Like Peter the Hermit before him, Bernard's fiery rhetoric inadvertently stirred up anti-Jewish violence, particularly in the Rhineland again. Pogroms broke out.
And you mentioned earlier that the idea of crusading was expanding.
This is where it becomes really clear. The Pope actually sanctioned other campaigns under the crusading banner at the same time. There was a crusade against pagan Slavs, the Wends, in northern Europe in 1147.
The Wendish Crusade.
Right. And also renewed efforts against the Moors in the Iberian Peninsula, the Reconquista. The successful siege of Lisbon in 1147 was part of this, involving crusaders on their way to the Holy Land who stopped off to help. One chronicler, Helmul the Bosau, explicitly talked about these three theaters of war.
So the concept is definitely broadening beyond just the Holy Land by this point. How did the main expedition to the east fare?
It was pretty much a disaster. The German army under Emperor Conrad III was defeated badly near Dorylaeum, same place the First Crusade had won.
Ouch. And the French?
The French army, led by King Louis VII and famously including his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, made it further, but was hampered by internal arguments and losses.
Did they achieve anything significant?
Their main goal became attacking Damascus, which had actually been an ally against Zengi previously. The siege in 1148 was short-lived and failed completely. They retreated in disarray.
So the Second Crusade was a failure in the East.
A major failure. It really dampened enthusiasm for crusading for quite a while. It showed the huge logistical challenges and the difficulty of coordinating these massive multinational forces.
Until the next crisis, I suppose, what prompted the Third Crusade.
An even bigger disaster for the Crusader states, the rise of Saladin. He united Muslim forces in Egypt and Syria, and then at the Battle of Hattin in July 1187, he absolutely crushed the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem.
In Hattin, that's a pivotal moment.
Absolutely devastating. Most of the Crusader knights were killed or captured. Saladin then swept through the kingdom, and in October 1187, he recaptured Jerusalem itself.
After almost 90 years in Christian hands, that must have sent absolute shockwaves through Europe.
It did. This time, the response was massive. The three most powerful monarchs in Western Europe answered the call.
We're talking.
Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, King Philip II Augustus of France, and King Richard I of England the Lionheart.
The Crusade of Kings, how was it funded?
Through a special tax called the Saladin Tithe, levied across England and France, it was a huge financial undertaking.
Did things go smoothly?
Not exactly. Frederick Barbarossa tragically drowned crossing a river in Anatolia, and much of his large army dispersed. Philip and Richard arrived by sea, but they famously did not get along.
Political rivalries, even on Crusade.
Always. Their main joint effort was the Siege of Acre, a vital port city Saladin had captured. It was long, brutal, disease-ridden, lasting from August 1189 to July 1191.
And controversial.
Very. After Acre finally surrendered, Richard, frustrated by delays in the prisoner exchange, ordered the execution of nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners. A really dark moment.
Philip went home after Acre fell, didn't he?
Yes, leaving Richard in command. Richard then led the Crusader army south, winning a significant victory over Saladin at the Battle of Arsuf and recapturing the port of Jaffa. He marched towards Jerusalem twice, but ultimately decided he couldn't take or hold it.
So Jerusalem remained out of reach. How did it end?
With negotiation. Richard and Saladin, despite being enemies, developed a degree of mutual respect. They agreed to the Treaty of Jaffa in 1192.
What was terms?
The Crusaders would keep control of a thin coastal strip from Tyre down to Jaffa. Jerusalem would stay under Muslim control, but unarmed Christian pilgrims would be allowed to visit the holy sites. Richard then sailed for home.
So, partial success. They regained ground, but not the main prize.
Pretty much. It salvaged the Crusader presence, but didn't restore the situation before Hattin. And then came the Fourth Crusade, which, well, it went completely off the rails.
This is the one that ended up attacking Constantinople, right? How did that happen?
Exactly. Pope Innocent III, a very powerful pope, initiated it around 1202. The intended target was Egypt, seen as the center of Muslim power.
Makes strategic sense.
It did, but the problem was money. The Crusaders contracted with Venice for ships and supplies, but far fewer knights showed up than expected, and they couldn't pay the full amount.
So the Venetians had leverage.
Huge leverage. The elderly Venetian Doge, Enrico Dandolo, proposed a deal. Help us recapture the rebellious city of Zara on the Dalmatian coast, and we'll defer the debt and transport you.
But Zara was a Christian city, and under the protection of the King of Hungary, who had himself taken the cross.
Precisely. Pope Innocent III forbade the attack, threatening excommunication. But the Crusaders felt trapped. They went ahead and attacked and captured Zara in November 1202.
So they started by attacking fellow Christians. Not a great look.
Not at all. And then came diversion number 2. A young Byzantine prince, Alexius Angelos, arrived in their camp. His father had been deposed as emperor. He promised the Crusaders vast sums of money, supplies for their crusade to Egypt, and the submission of the Greek Orthodox Church to Rome, if they helped him regain the throne in Constantinople.
Another tempting offer, diverting them again.
The leadership, particularly the French nobles and the Venetians, agreed. They sailed to Constantinople, forced the reigning emperor to flee, and installed Alexios and his restored father.
But the promised payments didn't materialize.
Exactly. The new regime couldn't raise the money, and popular resentment against the Crusaders grew in the city. Tensions boiled over. Alexios Angelos himself was overthrown and murdered by a rival Byzantine faction. The Crusaders, now stranded and unpaid, decided to take the city for themselves.
The sack of Constantinople.
April 1204. It was brutal. For 3 days, the Crusaders rampaged through the richest city in Christendom. They massacred thousands, desecrated churches, including the Hagia Sophia, and looted unimaginable amounts of treasure and holy relics, which ended up in churches all across Western Europe.
The impact must have been profound.
Devastating. It shocked contemporaries, even in the West. It dealt a mortal blow to the Byzantine Empire and permanently poisoned relations between the Catholic West and the Orthodox East. The schism became irreparable, and of course, very few of these crusaders ever actually made it to the Holy Land.
So a crusade that started with the aim of reclaiming Jerusalem ended up destroying the major Christian power in the East. The irony is staggering.
It's one of the most controversial episodes in the entire history of the Crusades. It really shows how motives could shift from piety to pure greed and political ambition.
This really raises that question. After such massive, costly efforts and results like the Fourth Crusade, did the original drive for Jerusalem just fade away? Or did other priorities take over?
It's a mix. The idea of Jerusalem never fully died, but the focus certainly shifted, and maybe the widespread popular enthusiasm waned compared to the First Crusade. You still had movements like the so-called Children's Crusade in 1212.
Was that actual children?
Mostly adolescents and young adults, it seems, caught up in a wave of popular religious fervor, believing their purity would achieve what armies couldn't. They aimed for Jerusalem, but, well, none actually got there. Most were dispersed, sold into servitude, or died along the way. A tragic episode.
And the formal, papally-led crusades continued.
Yes. The Fifth Crusade, from 1217 to 1221, was heavily pushed by Pope Innocent III before his death, and his successor, Honorius III. This one did target Egypt, as originally planned for the Fourth.
Did they have more success?
Initially, yes. They managed to capture the key port city of Damietta in the Nile Delta in 1219 after a long siege.
A significant achievement.
It was, and interestingly, the Sultan of Egypt, Al-Kamil, actually offered to trade Jerusalem back to the Crusaders in exchange for them leaving Egypt and returning Damietta.
They were offered Jerusalem. Why didn't they take it?
The papal legate in charge, Pelagius, rejected the offer. The thinking was that Jerusalem, without wider territorial control, would be impossible to defend. They decided to push on towards Cairo instead.
And that worked out.
Nope, it was a disaster. They advanced up the Nile, got trapped by seasonal floods, cut off from supplies, and were forced to surrender. They had to give Damietta back just to be allowed to leave. Another failure.
Okay, so force wasn't working consistently. Then came the Sixth Crusade, which you mentioned was different.
Very different, led by Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II between 1228 and 1229. What's fascinating is that Frederick was actually excommunicated by the Pope at the time.
He led a crusade while excommunicated. How?
He had previously married the heiress to the Kingdom of Jerusalem and had vowed to go on crusade but kept delaying. The Pope excommunicated him. Frederick went anyway, partly to fulfill his vow, partly for political reasons, but instead of fighting...
He negotiated.
Exactly. He spoke Arabic, was known for his interest in science and culture, and had a decent relationship with Sultan Al-Kamil, the same sultan from the Fifth Crusade. They hammered out the Treaty of Jaffa in 1229.
And this treaty did regain Jerusalem.
It did, remarkably. It ceded Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and a corridor to the coast back to Christian control for 10 years. Though, importantly, the Temple Mount, with its Muslim holy sites, remained under Muslim administration.
So a diplomatic coup.
Absolutely. Frederick marched into Jerusalem and crowned himself king in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It was a success, but achieved through diplomacy by an excommunicated emperor, which didn't sit well with the papacy or many traditional crusaders.
Unconventional, to say the least. Did it last?
The 10-year truce held, more or less, but after it expired, Jerusalem fell again, this time to Khwarezmian mercenaries allied with Egypt, in 1244. This prompted the Seventh Crusade.
Led by
King Louis IX of France, later St. Louis, a genuinely pious king. He also targeted Egypt, landing in 1249 and quickly retaking Damietta.
Deja vu. Did they get offered Jerusalem again?
Apparently, yes. And again, the offer seems to have been rejected in favor of pushing on to capture Egypt entirely.
And again.
Again, disaster. The French army advanced towards Mansoura, won a costly initial battle, but then got bogged down. Louis himself was defeated at the Battle of Feriskar in 1250, captured, and had to be ransomed for a huge sum and the return of Damietta.
It seems attacking Egypt was strategically sound, but practically doomed.
It certainly proved incredibly difficult, and while Louis was imprisoned, something crucial happened in Egypt.
The rise of the Mamluks.
Exactly. The Ayyubid dynasty, Saladin's successors, were overthrown by their own elite slave soldiers, the Mamluks. Figures like Qutuz, and especially Baibars, emerged as powerful new leaders.
And they faced a new threat too, didn't they? The Mongols?
Yes. The Mongol Empire had been expanding relentlessly. They sacked Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. They seemed unstoppable. But in 1260, at the Battle of Ain Jalut in Palestine, the Mamluks under Qutuz and Baibars inflicted the first major defeat on the Mongols.
A turning point.
Hugely significant. It halted the Mongol advance westward and cemented Mamluk power in Egypt and Syria. Baibars then became sultan and adopted a systematic policy of eradicating the remaining crusader states.
Picking them off one by one.
Methodically. Between 1265 and 1271, he captured major Frankish castles and cities like Antioch. He pushed the Crusaders back to just a few coastal strongholds.
Was there any final Western response?
Louis the Next tried again with the Eighth Crusade in 1270. But oddly, possibly at the urging of his brother Charles of Anjou, who had interests there, he attacked Tunis in North Africa first.
Tunis. Why?
The strategic rationale is debated, perhaps hoping to convert the ruler or secure a base, but Louis caught dysentery shortly after landing and died there.
So St. Louis died crusading in North Africa.
Yes. Prince Edward of England, later King Edward I, arrived shortly after Louis's death. His small force continued to Acre, sometimes called the Lord Edward's Crusade or the Ninth Crusade. He achieved little militarily, but did manage to negotiate a 10-year truce. It was really the last significant effort from Europe for the Holy Land itself.
And after that, truce.
The Mamluks resumed their advance, Tripoli fell, and then came the final act, the Siege of Acre in 1291. It was a desperate defense, but the Mamluks overwhelmed the city. The remaining Christian strongholds fell quickly after. The very last outpost, the island of Ruad, was taken in 1302.
The end of Outremer. 2 centuries of presence wiped out.
The end of the Crusader states in the Levant, yes. But, as we discussed, the idea of crusading didn't just vanish, it had already adapted.
Right, the Reconquista in Spain continued.
Until 1492. The Northern Crusades against pagans in the Baltic went on into the 15th century. There had been the Albigensian Crusade against perceived heretics in southern France in the early 13th century. Popes even declared political crusades against their enemies in Italy and Germany.
And later against the Ottomans.
Yes, anti-Ottoman crusades continued in various forms right up until the late 17th century, like the relief of Vienna in 1683 and subsequent campaigns. The crusading impulse found new targets long after the fall of Acre.
It's really clear how that initial religious fervor for Jerusalem morphed and was repurposed over centuries for vastly different political and territorial goals.
Absolutely. The adaptability of the concept is one of its most striking features.
So, reflecting on all this, what stands out to you? What's the lasting shadow of these centuries of conflict, and how do we even begin to grapple with it today?
Well, beyond the more romanticized legacies, tales of knightly heroism, some national myths, a few place names, perhaps a really significant legacy is how the Crusades are interpreted and used now.
In modern politics.
Yes, definitely. It plays out in quite starkly different ways. For instance, within political Islam, it's not uncommon for thinkers, historians, politicians to draw direct lines from the medieval Crusades to modern events.
Like the creation of Israel.
That's a frequent comparison, yeah. The Crusades are often framed as the historical precedent for Western imperialism and intervention in the Middle East. This narrative can be used to justify or encourage ideas of modern jihad as a defensive response. It's a narrative of historical grievance.
And on the other side?
Conversely, you find some circles in the West, often on the political right, drawing different parallels. They might see contemporary events like migration or the perceived threat of radical Islam as analogous to the situation Europe faced back then.
Using Crusader imagery.
Sometimes, yes. Crusader symbols or rhetoric might be employed to suggest Christianity or Western culture is under threat, framing modern political issues in terms of a civilizational or religious clash reminiscent of the Crusades.
And it's crucial, as you said, that we're just reporting these interpretations exist in the source material, not endorsing them.
Absolutely critical. Our aim is to understand how this history is understood and utilized, not to take sides. It shows how potent history remains in shaping identities and political arguments today.
It really underscores why studying this period is important, not just for understanding the past, but for understanding present-day discourses.
Exactly. And the study itself, the historiography, is fascinating. We have incredible primary sources, chronicles written by people who were there, like the anonymous Gesta Francorum from the First Crusade, or Anna Comnène's Byzantine perspective in the Alexiad, William of Tyre's history written in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, or the views of Muslim historians like Ali ibn al-Athir.
A wealth of perspectives, even from back then.
Yes, though always needing critical reading, of course. And then centuries of secondary interpretation from Enlightenment critics like Voltaire and Gibbon, right up to modern scholars who continue to debate motives, impacts, and definitions. It's a constantly evolving field.
It's clear the Crusades aren't just dusty medieval history. Their echoes resonate strongly today, shaping narratives, identities, even conflicts. It's a powerful reminder of how deeply history runs. So we've journeyed from the complex web of causes to the chaotic fervor of the First Crusade, the shifting goals, the expansion to new fronts, the eventual decline in the Holy Land, and the enduring, often contested, legacy. We've seen pure faith mixed with brutal pragmatism, noble ideals clash with greed and political maneuvering.
It really drives home that history is rarely, if ever, simple. The Crusades are this intricate tapestry: religion, politics, economics, personal ambition, genuine piety, terrible violence, all interwoven. To understand it, you really have to engage critically, question the simple stories, and try to see it from multiple angles.
Absolutely. The Crusades starkly illustrate that clash between grand ideals and messy, often brutal, realities, leaving behind a legacy that's still debated and felt today. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Given all these shifting goals, the unforeseen consequences, the triumphs, and the utter disasters, what did success actually mean for those individuals who decided to take the cross all those centuries ago? Was it capturing a city, fulfilling a vow, gaining land, or something else entirely? Welcome to the deep dive. Nuclear weapons. Are they the ultimate deterrent? Or maybe the ultimate threat?
It's a huge question.
It really is. We've all heard about their, immense destructive power. But have you ever really stopped to think about the international efforts to control them?
Yeah, the global structures we've tried to build.
Exactly. And specifically, we're asking today, is the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, which was born way back in the Cold War, is it really fit for purpose in our incredibly complex 21st century world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It feels like it. That's the
Excellent.
core thing we're exploring today. We're taking a deep dive into, well, one of the most significant international agreements ever created, the NPT.
Definitely significant.
We'll navigate through its history, its foundational goals, and crucially, the intense debates and, frankly, the profound challenges it's facing right now, all based on the sources you've shared with us.
It's a fascinating area, and often quite contradictory, actually. The NPT is widely seen as, a cornerstone of global security.
Right.
Designed to stop the spread of nukes while also promoting disarmament.
But doing both at once.
That's the constant tension. It's incredibly difficult.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really understand how this treaty actually works, why it even came about in the first place, and what happens when countries push its boundaries or, even reject it completely. By the end of this, you'll hopefully have a much clearer sense of the massive stakes involved here. We're talking about managing the world's most dangerous weapons.
Absolutely. Monumental stakes.
So let's kick things off right at the beginning. What is the NPT, fundamentally? And what was happening globally that made it seem so necessary back then?
Well, they connected to that bigger picture. The NPT was very much a direct response to the Cold War, specifically the growing shadow of nuclear war.
The fear was palpable then.
Oh, absolutely. It was negotiated between roughly 1965 and 68, opened for signature that year, 1968, and then it officially came into force in 1970. The overriding concern, the thing driving it, was this fear that if too many countries got nuclear weapons, the world would become incredibly unstable.
Just multiplying the risk.
Exactly. Multiplying risks of accidents, miscalculation, outright conflict.
Yeah.
We did see some early steps trying to balance things, like Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace idea.
Yes, I remember.
And setting up the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, to put safeguards on peaceful nuclear tech.
And right from the start, the NPT created these distinct categories of countries, didn't it? Can you explain who these nuclear weapon states are and how they were defined?
Yes, and this is a really crucial point. The treaty identifies 5 specific states as nuclear weapon states, or NWS.
Who are they?
That's the U.S., Russia taking over from the Soviet Union, of course, the U.K., France, and China.
And that specific group wasn't random.
Not at all. It was based purely on a historical fact. They had all built and tested a nuclear device before a specific date.
Which one?
January 1st, 1967. Anyone who hadn't done that by that date and signed the treaty is classified as a non-nuclear weapon state, or NNWS.
Got it. So this distinction, it creates the core deal, right? The central bargain.
That's exactly what it does. It creates what we often call the NPT's central bargain. Essentially, the non-nuclear weapon states promise, they agree, never to acquire nuclear weapons.
Okay, and what do they get in return?
In return, the nuclear weapon states, the NWS, pledged 2 key things. First, to share the benefits of peaceful nuclear technology.
Like for energy.
Precisely. And second, crucially, to pursue nuclear disarmament themselves, to work towards getting rid of their own arsenals.
And this whole bargain, this exchange, it's understood through the treaty's three pillars.
That's the common framework, yes, the three pillars.
Okay, let's dig into those pillars then, because they really are foundational. The first one is non-proliferation. Sounds simple enough, but you said it has layers.
It does, yeah. So under Article 1, the NWS, the nuclear states, they promise not to transfer nuclear weapons to anyone, or even help non-nuclear states get them.
Pretty clear.
And conversely, Article 2 makes the non-nuclear states promise not to receive, manufacture, or seek help in building these weapons.
Okay, so promises on both sides. How is it verified?
That's Article 3. It requires the non-nuclear states to accept safeguards from the IAEA. Inspections, monitoring, that kind of thing.
To prove their nuclear activities are peaceful.
Exactly. To verify they're sticking to their side of the deal.
But you mentioned nuances earlier. What about commitments not to use nuclear weapons against those non-nuclear states? Are those guarantees absolute?
That's a really key point. It's complicated. While the NWS have made political commitments, often called negative security assurances, not to use nukes against NTT non-nuclear states, the specifics can vary, and they aren't strictly part of the treaty text itself in the same way.
So there's wiggle room, interpretations.
There can be. For example, we've seen officials like former UK Defense Secretary Jeff Hoon or French President Chirac suggest that nuclear use might be considered in response to non-conventional attacks like chemical or biological weapons, even from non-nuclear states they labeled rogue states.
So not an ironclad guarantee then.
It shows that while the general principle is there, the exact conditions and interpretations can shift depending on the perceived threat landscape. It's not absolute.
Okay, let's move to the second pillar, disarmament. Now, this is where a lot of the friction seems to happen, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is often the most contentious pillar. Article 6 is, well, it's unique. It's the only legally binding commitment in any multilateral treaty that requires the nuclear weapon states to actually disarm.
The only one?
The only one with that kind of force. It obligates all parties, but especially the NWS, to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race and to nuclear disarmament.
Pursue negotiations in good faith. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, that's been debated. But significantly, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, in an advisory opinion back in 1996, went further.
How so?
They unanimously interpreted Article 6 not just as an obligation to talk about disarmament, but as an obligation to actually bring those negotiations to a conclusion, to achieve disarmament.
Wow, okay. That's a much stronger interpretation.
It is, but, and this is the big but.
There's always a but.
Right. Critics argue, and many non-nuclear states feel very strongly, that the NWS just haven't lived up to this obligation, especially since the Cold War ended.
Despite reductions in arsenals.
Yes, even with significant reductions, particularly by the U.S. and Russia, the perception for many NWS is that the NWS aren't genuinely committed to total elimination. They see modernization programs, new types of weapons.
And they feel like that breaks the bargain.
Precisely. This perceived lack of progress, this foot dragging, as some call it, is seen by many as undermining the treaty's whole legitimacy. And some argue it even, inadvertently encourages proliferation elsewhere because it erodes trust.
A real sticking point. Okay, pillar number 3, peaceful use of nuclear energy. On the surface, this sounds great, totally benign, but you hinted it creates a paradox.
It absolutely does. Article 4 affirms what it calls the inalienable right of all treaty members to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Think power plants, medical isotopes, research.
And to cooperate internationally on that.
Exactly. And that's vital for many countries' energy and development plans. However, it also creates what Mohammed El-Baradei, the former head of the IAEA, famously called the Achilles heel of the whole non-proliferation regime.
The Achilles heel, why?
Because of the technologies involved, specifically uranium enrichment and plutonium reprocessing, ENR technologies.
Okay, explain why ENR is the problem.
Because these are the exact same technologies needed to produce fissile material, the highly enriched uranium or plutonium that forms the core of a nuclear bomb.
So the path to peaceful energy is basically right next door to the path to a weapon.
Exactly. A country that develops a full nuclear fuel cycle, including enrichment or reprocessing, even if it says it's purely for peaceful purposes, essentially gains a virtual or latent nuclear weapons capability.
Meaning they could switch tracks relatively quickly?
Potentially, yes. They'd have the sensitive technology, the materials, the expertise. It dramatically shortens the time they'd need to build a weapon if they decided to.
So that's the core tension. Article 4 gives the right, but Articles 1, 2, and 3 try to prevent the weapon's outcome.
Precisely. It's a constant, delicate, and often fraught balancing act right at the heart of the NPT. How do you share the benefits without spreading the danger?
And this hasn't really been resolved.
Not fully. It remains, you could argue, the treaty's greatest systemic vulnerability, that inherent dual-use nature of the technology.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Now, let's talk about the states that really challenge the NPT framework, either those outside it entirely or those inside with, let's say, complicated histories.
Right. So there are 4 UN member states that have never signed or joined the NPT.
And they are.
India, Israel, Pakistan, and South Sudan. Now, South Sudan is a different case. Relatively new nation, no nuclear program. But the other 3,
They're the key ones here.
yes. India, Israel, and Pakistan are all known or widely believed to possess nuclear weapons outside the treaty framework.
Let's take India and Pakistan first. They both tested weapons.
They did. India first in 1974, then again, along with Pakistan, in 1998. Their main argument against the NPT has always been that it's discriminatory.
How so?
They see it as creating a kind of nuclear apartheid, dividing the world into the haves and have-nots, based on that, frankly, arbitrary cutoff date of 1967. They argue, why should those 5 get special status?
Makes sense from their perspective.
India often emphasizes its policy of minimal deterrence and points to what it called its clean non-proliferation record, meaning it hasn't spread technology to others despite being outside the NPT.
And they've managed to get nuclear cooperation deals.
Yes, that's been controversial. India secured a major civil nuclear deal with the US and also Australia, and China has significantly expanded its nuclear cooperation with Pakistan.
How does that impact the NPT?
Well, critics argue these bilateral deals weaken the NPT's authority. They kind of legitimize nuclear programs outside the treaty, potentially undermining the goal of universal adherence.
Okay, what about Israel? Their situation seems quite different. More ambiguous.
Very much so. Israel practices a policy of deliberate ambiguity or opacity. It neither confirms nor denies possessing nuclear weapons.
The consensus is they have them.
The strong consensus among analysts is yes, potentially an arsenal of somewhere between 100 and 200 warheads. Their position is often explained through this idea of Israeli exceptionality. Meaning, given its small size, its unique geopolitical situation, the profound security threats it perceives in the region, it feels justified in maintaining this deterrent capability, even opaquely.
And the IAEA.
The IAEA has repeatedly passed resolutions calling on Israel to join the NPT and open its nuclear facilities to comprehensive safeguards, to inspections.
And Israel's response?
Israel has consistently rejected these calls.
Okay, so those are the states outside the NPT.
Yeah.
What about countries that were members but ran into major problems or left? North Korea comes to mind immediately.
North Korea is definitely the prime example. They actually joined the NPT back in 1985. Reportedly, part of the motivation was to get Soviet help with their nuclear energy program.
But things went wrong.
Pretty quickly, yes.
Right.
By the early 90s, IAEA inspections started revealing inconsistencies. Discrepancies suggesting they had reprocessed more plutonium, potentially for weapons, than they'd declared.
Non-compliance.
Clear noncompliance. This led to a crisis. They announced they were withdrawing from the NPT in 1993, then kind of paused that withdrawal under a deal with the U.S., the agreed framework.
Which didn't last.
No. By 2003, they formally and finally withdrew. They remain the only country ever to have withdrawn from the NPT.
And then they tested a weapon.
First test was in 2006. They've conducted multiple tests since then, up to 2017, and also developed a uranium enrichment capability, giving them a second path to bomb material.
And diplomacy failed. Six-party talks and all that.
Repeatedly, yes.
Yeah.
And interestingly, North Korea often points to the fate of leaders like Muammar Gaddafi in Libya.
Who gave up his WMD program.
Exactly, gave them up, and was later overthrown and killed during the Arab Spring. Pyongyang explicitly calls that a cautionary tale, arguing it proves that only having nuclear weapons guarantees regime survival against external pressure.
A grim lesson from their perspective. What about Iran? Their story is also complex. They're still NPT members, right?
Yes, Iran has been a party since 1970, but their issues arose later. In 2003, the IAEA found Iran had failed for years to declare certain nuclear materials and activities, including enrichment research.
Another case of noncompliance.
Yes. The IAEA Board of Governors found Iran in noncompliance, and in 2006, they reported the case to the UN Security Council.
Leading to sanctions.
Yes, several rounds of UN Security Council resolutions demanding Iran suspend all enrichment-related activities. Iran largely refused, arguing Article 4 gives it the right to peaceful nuclear energy, including enrichment.
Then came the JCPOA, the nuclear deal.
Right, the 2015 deal, which placed limits on Iran's program in exchange for sanctions relief. But then the U.S. withdrew from that deal in 2018.
And things have escalated since.
Considerably. And now there's a very recent development. As of mid-June 2025, reports indicate Iran's parliament is actually drafting a bill to withdraw from the NPT altogether.
Wow, why now?
They're citing the ongoing conflict with Israel as the immediate trigger. If they did withdraw, it would be a massive blow to the treaty.
A really serious development to watch. Are there any counterexamples, states that moved away from weapons?
There's one truly remarkable case, South Africa.
Ah, yes, they had weapons.
He did. During the apartheid era, they secretly developed a small arsenal of 6 gun-type nuclear devices. But then, as the transition to majority rule approached,
They dismantled them.
voluntarily dismantled the entire program, destroyed the weapons, the facilities, everything. Then, in 1991, the new government acceded to the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state.
That's incredible. The only country to build nukes and then give them up.
The only one to do it entirely voluntarily like that. It's often held up as a powerful example of denuclearization being possible.
A positive story. But then there's Ukraine.
Ukraine's story is poignant and deeply relevant now. They joined the NPT in 1994 as a non-nuclear state.
Giving up the Soviet weapons on their territory.
Exactly. They inherited a huge arsenal after the Soviet Union collapsed, the third largest in the world at the time. They gave them up in exchange for security assurances.
The Budapest Memorandum.
Yes, from the US, UK, and critically Russia. Assurances of sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Assurances that obviously weren't honored.
Tragically not. Russia's invasions in 2014, and especially the full-scale invasion in 2022, have led many analysts, and certainly many Ukrainians, to question whether giving up those weapons was wise.
Raising the question, can you really trust security assurances against a nuclear-armed aggressor?
It starkly highlights the argument that, for some nations facing an existential threat from a nuclear power, only having their own nuclear deterrent offers a true guarantee of sovereignty. It's a grim calculation that challenges the NPT's core premise for non-nuclear states.
These cases really show the pressures, don't they? National security, perceived unfairness, the sheer power of these weapons. It all pushes against the treaty's goals.
They absolutely do. It shows the APT operates in a messy reality, not an ideal world. Geopolitics, regional rivalries, distrust, they all constantly test the treaty's foundations.
So it's clear the NPT, even though it was extended indefinitely, is under, well, immense pressure. Let's talk about some of those ongoing issues. What's challenging its foundation and interpretation today?
Well, a major point of friction, as we touched on, is enforcement and interpretation, particularly around Article 6, the disarmament commitment.
The feeling that the nuclear states aren't holding up their end.
Exactly. There's this persistent critique, especially from the Global South, that the NWS haven't genuinely pursued disarmament with the urgency required by the treaty and the ICJ opinion.
Even though the U.S. and Russia have cut their arsenals significantly since the Cold War peak.
They have, and NWS often point to those reductions. But many NNWS look at the remaining huge arsenals, the ongoing modernization programs, the development of new, perhaps more usable tactical weapons, and they remain deeply skeptical.
And that fuels the narrative you mentioned, the haves versus the have-nots.
It absolutely does. It feeds that sentiment that the treaty is fundamentally unequal, a way for the original nuclear powers to maintain their elite status while denying it to others. That perception really corrodes trust, which is vital for any treaty to work.
And that other core tension, the Article 4 loophole, peaceful energy versus weapons capability, that's still a live issue.
Oh, definitely. The spread of sensitive nuclear technology, particularly ENR, remains a huge proliferation concern. How do you ensure a country's enrichment program stays peaceful? It's incredibly difficult to verify with 100% certainty.
Beyond ENR, Are there other practices that raise NPT compliance questions?
Yes, another contentious area is nuclear sharing.
What's that exactly?
This primarily refers to the long-standing U.S. arrangement within NATO, where American tactical nuclear bombs are stationed in 5 non-nuclear NATO countries: Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey.
And pilots from those countries are trained to deliver them.
Correct. In wartime, the plan is these non-nuclear allies would use U.S. nuclear weapons. Critics argue this clearly violates the spirit, if not the letter, of Articles 1 and 2, the pledge not to transfer and not to receive nuclear weapons.
How do the U.S. and NATO justify it?
They argue that since the weapons remain under U.S. control in peacetime, no transfer occurs until a decision for war, at which point the treaty might arguably no longer be fully operative. It's a legal interpretation that many find questionable.
And Russia's recent moves fit into this pattern.
Very much so. Russia deploying its own tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus, which was confirmed by early 2024, is seen by many as mirroring these NATO arrangements.
And potentially deploying new missiles like the Oreshnik there, too.
That's a further concern, yes, potentially by the end of 2025. These moves further complicate the NPT landscape, blurring the lines and potentially lowering the threshold for nuclear use in Europe. It adds another layer of instability.
So, with all these pressures, disarmament disputes, proliferation risks, sharing arrangements, how are the treaty's own checkup meetings, the review conferences, actually going?
Not well, frankly. These review conferences, or RevCons, are meant to happen every 5 years to assess the treaty's health and agree on future steps, but they frequently end in deadlock.
Like the most recent one.
Exactly. The August 2022 RevCon ended without any agreed final document. Consensus was blocked, primarily by Russia, because of disagreements over language related to its invasion of Ukraine, particularly concerning the military control and safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is Europe's largest.
So, real-world conflicts are directly paralyzing the treaty's own review process.
Precisely. It shows how deeply intertwined the NPT is with broader geopolitical tensions. When major powers are in conflict, it becomes incredibly difficult to find common ground even on assessing the treaty, let alone strengthening it.
And amidst all this perceived weakness or deadlock, other initiatives have emerged. You mentioned the TPNW.
Yes, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It was adopted in 2017, came into force in 2021. It's a direct response, largely from non-nuclear states, to the frustration over the lack of disarmament progress under the NPT.
How does it relate to the NPT?
It explicitly reaffirms the NPT as the cornerstone, but it goes further by creating a clear, comprehensive legal ban on nuclear weapons possessing, using, testing, developing, transferring, etc. It aims to stigmatize nuclear weapons, much like treaties have done for chemical and biological weapons.
But the nuclear weapon states aren't part of it.
No, none of the NWS nor states under extended nuclear deterrence like NATO members or Japan or South Korea have joined the TPNW. They argue it could undermine the NPT and doesn't reflect the security realities they face. So it creates another layer of division within the broader non-proliferation and disarmament community.
So let's try and synthesize this. What does it all mean for that initial question we posed? Is the NPT still fit for purpose today? We've covered a lot of ground.
We certainly have.
From the 3 pillars and that central bargain to the challenges from countries outside like India and Israel. The really complicated histories of North Korea and Iran, right up to these very current events like Iran maybe leaving the NPT, Russia putting nukes in Belarus. It's a complex picture.
It is. And look, the NPT is clearly not perfect. It faces huge, arguably growing challenges. There's no denying that. But despite all the criticisms, all the pressures, you have to acknowledge what it has achieved. Its core initial goal was to stop the uncontrolled spread of nuclear weapons.
To prevent that world of 25 or 30 nuclear powers that people feared back in the 60s.
Exactly. And largely, it succeeded in that. We don't have dozens of nuclear states. It remains the most widely adhered to arms control treaty in history. That signifies a broad, even if sometimes strained, international agreement that nuclear proliferation is dangerous and needs managing.
So, flawed, under pressure, but still essential in some way.
I think that's fair. It provides a crucial framework, even if the implementation is constantly debated and challenged.
It really does feel like this constant tightrope walk, doesn't it? Balancing security needs, national sovereignty against the absolutely terrifying power of this technology.
It is a tightrope walk.
And the world seems to be at a particularly critical point right now. Events like the war in Ukraine, the tensions between Israel and Iran, they're not just abstract political issues. They raise fundamental questions about the treaty's future. Can it hold? Can that delicate balance it tries to maintain survive?
And that really brings us to the crucial question, maybe the one for you, the listener, to ponder going forward. In this current era, with global tensions seemingly rising, rapid technological changes happening, can the NPT adapt?
Or will it break?
Or will the pressures from both the nuclear haves and the have-nots force some kind of fundamental rethink, a whole new approach to how we manage these existential threats? The status quo feels increasingly fragile.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for walking us through that complex landscape.
My pleasure. It's a vital topic.
It really is. Thanks to all of you for joining us on this deep dive into the NPT. As always, keep learning, keep questioning, and stay well informed.